Well, hello again. It is Leslie Togorda, your brand astrologer and designer. And this week we are here talking about our upcoming Mercury retrograde in Cancer. Oh my goodness. I know that most of you know that Mercury retrograde is coming up, and I get a sense that people get really fearful. But what I really want you to feel is I want you to feel empowered by this time of year, because you know what? You get to decide how you use this Mercury retrograde energy, right? You can judge it as good, you can judge it as bad, and however you judge it, you're going to get in return. So if you understand what Mercury retrograde has to share with us, how we can lead with curiosity about what Mercury retrograde wants us to know and understand, you'll be able to use this energy effectively in your life and business instead of freaking the F out. So today, what we're going to do is we are going to recap exactly what a Mercury retrograde is and kind of what it looks like in the astrology of this summer. If you have been following me for a while, there's another episode for Mercury retrograde for the one that we had in February. And last week, I uploaded a bonus episode for Astrology of a Revolution. And so that kind of gave you the timeline of all the astrological events of 2020 and how this Mercury retrograde in Cancer fits right smack dab in it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we're going to really talk about the themes of Mercury retrograde in Cancer, what this cosmic cycle wants us to consider in our lives and our businesses. Of course, we have to cover the do's and the don'ts of a Mercury retrograde. Then I'm going to be answering some of the questions from my community that they asked that I think will be super helpful for you. And then we're going to be looking at what Mercury retrograde wants you to reconsider as it transits your houses. So this is a time to, pick up your natal chart reading skills and look at where Mercury retrograde will be crossing over in your natal chart. So before we jump in, I could really use your help. If you haven't already, please consider rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Your review and rating helps amplify this podcast getting seen and heard by more people. I could really use your help, so please rate and review. If I read your review here, I will send you a Savvy Luminary goodie bag. And of course, if you have friends who are into astrology and entrepreneurship, please share this podcast with them and help me accomplish my mission by empowering entrepreneurs to use astrology as a tool so they can also reach their highest potential. On Apple Podcasts, user Clear and Calm gives us a 5-star rating and says, a must listen if you are looking for your brand to represent all that you are. Brand as you are according to the stars. Love it. Thank you so much, Clear and Calm. I really appreciate your rating. Okie dokie. So let's get into a recap of what Mercury retrograde is and the astrology of this summer. So Mercury retrograde happens 3 times a year. It lasts for 3 weeks. So, there's like 9 whole weeks out of the whole of the year, 9 weeks out of 52 weeks that Mercury is going retrograde. And it's pretty amazing to me that we get to do this kind of like reset, right? When you have too many tabs open or you haven't restarted your computer, how it goes wonky. Well, think of a Mercury retrograde as a restart for your life, yourself, right? And so this Mercury retrograde is happening in the watery sign of Cancer. This time last year, Mercury was also retrograding in Cancer. There's been this theme of Mercury retrogrades going through the water signs for the last couple of years. Now, this particular Mercury retrograde comes right at the pivot, one day before the solstice. So if you are in the northern hemisphere, of course, this is the summer solstice. If you're in the southern hemisphere, the winter solstice. And regardless of where you are on Earth, the solstice is a time of great energetic release from Mother Nature, Mother Earth. It is a pivotal time in the year. And not only does Mercury retrograde come one day before the solstice, but it also happens 2 days before the new moon solar eclipse in Cancer. Now, this is the second of our 3 eclipses. Normally, eclipses come in pairs of 2, but this year we get 3 of them, all right in the summer, throwing a wild card at this beginning of a revolution that we are in. And so we are really magnifying, amplifying the themes of Cancer on a personal level, in our communities, as well as on a global level. So if you have been following me for a while, or you caught the highlights from Astrology of a Revolution, it's a workshop that I posted last week that kind of looked at all of the pivotal astrology of 2020. I put some highlights for the timeline. You can see how this Mercury retrograde right in the middle of our year is really asking us to rethink and reconsider and reintegrate Cancerian themes in our personal lives, in our communities, as well as in our world. On Monday, June 15th at 2 p.m. Pacific, I'll be hosting a Mercury Retrograde Survival Guide. I actually would like to call this a revival guide, because we don't have to think about Mercury retrograde as this time where we're just trying to keep our head above water. We can actually thrive during this time when we understand the themes that we need to consider. So if you want to take a deep dive with me about Mercury retrograde, and I'll be also doing some mini readings at the end of the workshop, head on over to thesavvyluminary.com/Mercury to register. Now, it's a pay what you can class. I would rather have you show up to get the learnings that you need so that you're not freaking out, right? I want to empower you. So if you can pay, please consider paying, because I will also be donating proceeds from this workshop. You can find out more again at thesavvyluminary.com/Mercury. So as I mentioned earlier, Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year. And this is because the orbit of Mercury is so quick around the sun. And from our perspective here on Earth, it looks like it's going backwards in the sky. Of course, Mercury isn't going backwards in the sky. It's just from our unique perspective here on planet Earth. And when Mercury goes retrograde, this is a time to analyze our mindset, right? Mercury is our input and our output of thoughts, the way we communicate, the way we express ourselves, the way we perceive information, the way we process information. As my astrology teacher tells me, think of Mercury as just a device. Okay, it doesn't have its own consciousness that it needs to kind of like express its own self. It's here to express the consciousness that comes through your own soul, or also looking at your sun sign, right? So it's appropriate that Mercury never goes too far away from the sun. It never goes past 32, 33-ish degrees from the sun. So when Mercury is going retrograde this season, it's going to be spending its entire time in Cancer. Right now, we're currently in the shadow zone, meaning that we are in the part of the zodiac that as Mercury steps on its brakes to go backwards, it's going to be tracing back. If you need a full schedule of Mercury retrograde, head over to my show notes on thesavvyluminary.com. I'll have all of the Mercury retrograde schedule, or you can follow me on social media. I'll have social media posts there too. So, with this Mercury retrograde in Cancer, we get to reconsider and rethink Cancerian themes. Now, Cancerian themes happen to us on a personal level, right? Like directly to us. It happens to us on a community level because we here as entrepreneurs are leaders in our communities, as a business owner, as somebody who posts things on social media, as somebody who sells things to their fans and their customers, right? So thinking of your business as a community. And then, of course, we have the Cancerian themes on a collective global scale, not only in our own individual countries and the United States. I'm a US citizen in San Francisco. The United States happens to be a Cancer. Well, that was an entendre, huh? Let's just talk about it as the Cancerian zodiac. July 4th is smack dab during the Cancer season. So if you think about the zodiac sign of the United States, it is a Cancer. And so Cancer themes, right? We have emotional security. At its highest level as a water sign, all water signs are healing, right? But Cancer comes from this aspect of healing, of like creating emotional security, nurturing. So think of like just like your mom. If you have a good relationship with your mom, thinking about the ideal of a mom holding a newborn and taking care of it and raising a child. That would be kind of like the ideal of the Cancerian themes of taking care of something and loving it unconditionally. And then also our own ability to love ourselves unconditionally. The self-care that we allow ourselves to have is definitely a Cancerian theme. When we look at the three water signs together, we have Cancer, then we have Scorpio, and then we have Pisces. Because I mentioned earlier that all of the water signs are these healing signs, meaning they can feel and they can intuit and they can nurture and heal. But so Cancer is step one, right? The zodiac sign of Cancer is step one, where it creates a safe space. It holds space for healing. It creates the emotional safety net where people feel that they can express themselves and be vulnerable enough to do the healing. Then after that, Scorpio comes in, where it uses its transformative powers and its ability to trust itself to then do the deep work of transformation. And then it evolves to the Pisces watery ideal, where it then takes its transformation and connects it to the infinite or our highest self. So you can see how each of these water signs build on top of each other for healing, but it starts with creating and holding space for healing to happen. So when we think about the emotional security and the Cancer themes that need to happen in our lives on a personal level, in our businesses as we build communities, and this is all about social change. It's all about inclusion, right? I hope you can see that. And then how do we relate that on a collective scale for justice for all? While not exactly a Cancer theme, it has its roots in the Cancerian principles of, at the highest ideals of social justice, of taking care of each other, of taking care of the people who are the weakest, right? Like you can see how all of these things work together. So when Mercury is going retrograde and tracing back through Cancer, through 14 degrees and 5 degrees of Cancer, right? When it's kind of hovering and dancing over that place, Mercury is asking us to rethink what these themes mean to us on a personal level, in our communities, as well as on a collective. On a personal level, this can simply just mean our home life. It could also mean our interior landscape, right? Some of us don't have like this home life, but we can look to our roots or what makes the home. That expression, home is where the hat is, whatever that means to you. And in our businesses, right now it's more than likely that you're working from home. So what does your home office look like? If you've ever seen my home office, it is literally a cubby under the stairs full of clutter that you can't necessarily see from this little slice through this viewfinder on the camera. In your business, when you're creating a safe space, right? We've been hearing a lot about this, creating a safe space. What does that mean, right? Does that mean, I hope it means for you, this place that's inclusive, that this place that everybody feels safe. Now, I don't know, maybe some of you choose to not have safe spaces for their businesses. That's totally up to you. But this is coming to the fore now as everybody is being asked, especially influencers, to create these open dialogues, to create these safe spaces so everybody feels welcomed. And then on a collective, on a global scale, what does this mean for your city, your communities, your country? And for you on on that global scale, what does that mean? What does emotional security mean to you on a global scale? I can't answer that for you, but I suspect you have some things coming up. All right, so let's talk about the do's and the don'ts of Mercury retrograde. So you've already heard these things more than likely about the do's of Mercury retrograde. Back up your tech, make extra time. Most of us are not commuting right now, so traffic shouldn't be an issue. But normally during Mercury retrogrades, small traffic jams or the inability to move around your neighborhood, things like that come up, right? In your business during your Mercury retrograde, have, your plan A, your plan B, your plan C, your plan D. We're going to be talking about this a little bit more in depth about, there's questions like, do you or don't you launch during a Mercury retrograde? And most importantly, during this Mercury retrograde, it is so important to trust your intuition and trust your heart. Remember, this is very Cancerian. So the Cancerian archetype is very connected to feelings and intuition. So trust that. Learn to reconnect with that. So 6 things you must do during a Mercury retrograde in Cancer. All right. I want you to reflect. Okay. Now, these 3 weeks, it's only 3 weeks, right? I know you probably feel the need to do, accomplish. But sometimes by reflecting as to what has already happened, you get to reintegrate and perfect things and polish things up and see things from a new perspective. So reflection is super important to do during your business. Now, later on, I'll be going through house by house the things that you need to reconsider. So you'll be able to understand where you want to kind of direct this reflection energy. Number 2, replenish. Right? Earlier, I was talking about on a personal level, self-care. Now, self-care is not a luxury, okay? Especially when you're doing the big things, when you're really affecting change, when you're really shaking things up and trailblazing and change making. I know all of you guys are doing this. So you must replenish and refill that cup. So sometimes it can mean taking a 30-minute nap during the middle of a workday. I 100% support that because I know that in the afternoons when I get tired, I often do take a nap. And I know that after that nap, I am so much more ready to be productive. So please look at this time as a time of replenishment, of self-care, and whatever that means for you. It doesn't have to be expensive, whatever that means for you. Number 3, I want you to reconnect. What I mean by reconnecting is I want you to reconnect to your heart's desires, right? Reconnect to those feelings that you want to rekindle in your personal life, in your business life, in your community. Look at it at all of those levels, right? And one of the most amazing ways to reconnect is to get really still, right? If you have a practice of meditation, it could be some kind of moving meditation. It could be sitting there meditation. However you get into the flow and reconnect, see if you can reconnect to your highest self at this time. And more often than not, it's about getting still and listening and trusting. Number 4, I would love you to practice acceptance. So, re-acceptance, rethinking what it means to accept things in your life. One of these things that's coming up for me a lot is this idea of self-acceptance. Now, how this works, let's see, how do I want to talk about this? How do I want to talk about self-acceptance? Oftentimes, we are working from this place where we are trying to get validation from others, right? But I want you to really rethink this, because oftentimes the person that you need acceptance from is yourself, right? Think about that. Now, I've been thinking about this a lot, especially with just our full moon, when I was doing my full moon release ritual and all the things that I was holding on to, this idea of ego and wanting to be seen and wanting to be heard and all of these things, thinking that I haven't yet gotten to the place where I thought I should be, right? We don't have to dig into that. But what kept on coming up for me during that time was this idea of the only person that I have to satisfy is myself. Am I doing enough for myself? Yes. So what does re-acceptance mean for you? For me, it's accepting myself. And, I put the re in there, but I don't know if, to this date, if I've ever really accepted myself. But that's my story, not yours. Number 5, I'd love for you to into it. So kind of similar to reconnecting to your highest self, this is like listening to your gut, listening to your intuition, really trusting in that spidey sense of yours. And, more than likely, we've probably dismissed our spidey sense, but I'd like you to reconnect to this beautiful intuition, because all the time, let me just tell you, all the time, your gut, your intuition, your spidey sense, whatever you want to call it, is sending you messages. And we've done such a good job teaching ourselves to ignore those messages. But this is the perfect time during Mercury retrograde to sharpen that saw and really reconnect to your spidey senses, because it has so much to tell you. Number 6, restore. Now, I'm talking about restoration here in terms of your home life, because your home life is the foundation from which you can move. Now, some of you might not have like a so-called home. We talked about wherever your hat is, that's your home. But what does that look for you? If you are kind of like one of those freedom life livers, like living off your laptop, maybe restoration means cleaning out your hard drive and like deleting those old files, right? But be sure you have everything backed up, because, as you're reorganizing and cleaning and things like that, it's going to feel really good to like let go, right? But again, because we're dealing with tech and it's a retrograde, you may want to have things backed up just in case the restoration doesn't go as planned. Luckily for that. Now, in your home life, this is a great time to reorganize. You might have already been doing this because of our shelter in place, getting rid of clutter, feeling like your home is really a home again. Again, going back to the idea, the Cancerian ideals of emotional security, and that starts at home. And home is wherever your heart or your hat is. So what comes up for you when I talk about these 6 things to do? Reflect, replenish, reconnect, reaccept, re-intuit, and restore. Send me an email, send me a DM. I would love to know what comes up for you. Now, before we get into the don'ts of Mercury retrograde, right? I feel like a lot of like the fear-mongering astrologers, focus so much on the don'ts, like don't sign a lease, don't sign a contract, don't do this, don't launch, don't all these things. Let's understand a little bit why fear-mongering astrologers will have you fearing things to do, because ultimately you need to trust your gut, right? You can't live your life and put everything on hold for an entire 3 weeks. Like, let's be realistic. That doesn't happen, right? Like life still has to go on. So how do you get some understanding about your life and business so that you can use this energy of Mercury retrograde versus, swimming upstream against it? So first of all, these are, during a Mercury retrograde, the things that can often happen are misunderstandings, mistakes, miscommunications, right? And also like tech glitches. Tech glitches, again, because Mercury is our communications device, right? So all of these little tech things can sometimes come up, but I'm not suspecting that a whole lot of tech glitches are going to come up this particular time, just because we're dealing mostly with water. We're dealing with healing, we're dealing with feelings. So misunderstandings, mistakes, miscommunications, right? Like really thinking about, am I being clear about what I want to say? Am I being clear? Am I really understanding what somebody else is trying to say? Or am I just jumping to conclusions, right? So when we think about these concepts of the things that can happen during a Mercury retrograde, this gives us more understanding as to why we want to maybe not necessarily avoid doing certain things, but give space around things so that we don't jump to conclusions and give ourselves headaches. So this is going to be a perfect segue into answering some of the questions that I received from various communities. So again, I have a free Facebook community for entrepreneurs looking to use astrology called The Savvy Luminary, same as this podcast. And I posted an Ask Me Anything because I wanted to answer some of these questions that people had about Mercury retrograde. So several of my community members have Mercury retrograde natally in their chart, meaning they were born during a Mercury retrograde. Now, you can find out if you were born during a Mercury retrograde that if you look on your natal chart and you look at the symbol for Mercury, it looks like it has two little horns. And if there is a little R next to that symbol, then you were born during a Mercury retrograde. Rita and Natasha both have Mercury retrograde natally, and they wanted to know how this Mercury retrograde affects them, right? And so while I don't have a Mercury that is retrograde natally, my Mercury is in Pisces. So already it's kind of like a Mercury retrograde, because Mercury in Pisces is kind of like, ooh, it's a little bit confused. It doesn't really it doesn't communicate, it doesn't transmit in your normal senses. And that's exactly what being born under a Mercury retrograde feels like. So Mercury rules both Gemini and Virgo. And when Mercury is going direct, Mercury first goes through Gemini, and Gemini is about the thought processes. It's collecting information and it wants to know everything. And then once it gets processed in the mind, it then moves into the body, and then Virgo can analyze it and take action on the next steps, right? That's how kind of the Mercury process through the zodiac is first through Gemini and then through Virgo. But for people who have natal Mercury retrograde, the process is backwards. They don't think their thought processes don't happen in their head. Their thought processes happen first in their body. They literally have to embody and feel the information and have it make sense throughout their physical being before they can logically make sense. So during a Mercury retrograde, if you have natal Mercury retrograde, this is going to feel like, I've returned to normal. Because for Mercury retrograde people, when Mercury is going direct, normally that's their confusion. And so, they're working, backwards essentially. So during a Mercury retrograde, for those of you with it natally, this is just going to feel like, I'm coming back to home. Joanna asks, How does this Mercury retrograde affect you if you have a lot of planets in Virgo? So, Joanna has a lot of planets in Virgo. And yes, we can look at, because Mercury is the ruler of Virgo, we would assume that there would be some extra kind of intensities for all of the things going on in Virgo. But unless Mercury, as it transits Cancer, is aspecting any of your planets in Virgo, but those really wouldn't be any of your major aspects. Now, this particular Mercury retrograde, because it's going to be transiting between Cancer, 5 degrees, and 14 degrees, the people that are going to feel it most intensely are going to be other water signs. If you have any natal planets in water signs between 5 and 14 degrees of Cancer, as well as cardinal signs. So again, the water signs are Cancer, Pisces, Scorpio. This Mercury retrograde is going to feel, there's going to be a flow with it. You're going to be able to really access your emotions better. And for the cardinal energies, Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, pop quiz there. For those energies, it's going to feel a little more intense. There are going to probably be episodes that happen during the Mercury retrograde that's going to really amplify things and kind of wake you up, have your eyes open up a little bit more. So don't fear them. Just really look to what these experiences are trying to get you to understand or see differently. Nikki asks, as the planet of communication, what does this mean for us and how do we communicate through our business when Mercury is in retrograde? Yes. So Mercury retrograde is, again, this is happening collectively for all of us as a transit, right? And so talking about earlier, how when Mercury is going retrograde, there's a lot of miscommunications that can happen. So while, you can look again at your chart as to where Cancer is transiting to get more specifics if you really need to kind of focus on reevaluating your communications. But for all of us, we just want to be super clear about our intentions and really reviewing what we are saying, reviewing what we are writing, making sure all of our I's are dotted, our T's are crossed, so that we are coming through as intended. Just because communications can be a little bit raw this time, again, going through Cancer. So we're going to be feeling this on a very emotional level. So making sure that your communications are inclusive, that they're very, how would you say, you're making sure that your communications are inclusive, that it is clear, that your intentions are coming through. And if things get miscommunicated, making sure that you don't go straight for the place of defensiveness, but really understand what the other person feels and is trying to understand from you so that there can become a place of commonality, right? So very important to be very careful with your communications during this time. A handful of people had the same question as to whether or not to launch during a Mercury retrograde. Now, this is a tricky one, right? Similar to where we can't stop our lives from happening. If you need to be earning some income and you need to sell a product right now, then you need to do it, right? Number one, trust your gut. Does your gut say, yes, let's go forward with this? Or does your gut say, hold on, this just doesn't feel right. Let me redo things and maybe just wait a little bit. There's nothing wrong with waiting a little bit, okay? Yes, I know we live in a hustle culture, but sometimes hustling just we need to wait a little bit. Now, earlier when I was talking about understanding some of the mishaps that can happen during a Mercury retrograde, will give you some insight as to when you launch. Now, if you're launching something new, and you have to launch something new, of course, you kind of don't, you ideally, you don't want to launch something new during a Mercury retrograde because of those mishaps. Now, if you have to launch during a Mercury retrograde, create lots of space. Again, the miscommunications. So making sure that all of your terms and your agreements and your contracts and your promises, all of those things, not only you, but some other people have gone through them to make sure that everything is super clear. And then if if at all possible, try to get things started with your starting your launch and your promotions before Mercury goes stations retrograde. So, June 17th or before. Try to get things started up before then. Try not to do anything on June 18th because that's the day that Mercury steps on the brakes and it stops completely and it goes backwards. Okay, like that time right around the station, the stopping, is the most intense part of the retrograde cycle. So try to avoid those days for like any big things happening. Now, if you have a program that you're promoting at this time, maybe they can start the program after Mercury finishes the retrograde cycle. So, Mercury will be going retrograde until July 12th, where it will step on the brakes to go forward again, but it won't be out of the shadow until July 26th. And then after 26th, think of like Mercury back on the highway. It's going, at its full speed, right? And so it's if you have to launch during that time, try to get it so it's after July 12th. And then maybe because you have like a 3-week runway, have your customers do some, work that will get them prepared to start with you when Mercury goes direct. Now, if you are relaunching, right? You've done the work, you refine things. This is not a new program. It's okay to launch because essentially this is just like an extension of something that you've already created. Now, Janelle asked earlier on Instagram, she has a studio, a healing studio, and a yoga studio, and she was asking of Mercury retrograde, or actually because of COVID-19, we've all sheltered in place, her studio was closed down, but they plan to reopen during the retrograde season. Is that okay? Yes, it's okay. All right. So, but again, making sure that you have lots of space, and this also applies for COVID, right? Creating lots of space for mistakes and mishaps to happen, to expect the unexpected, to have a plan A, plan B, plan C, and a plan D. Again, if you want to do a deeper dive with me on this Mercury retrograde, we're going to be talking about it for a whole 2 hours on Monday, June 15th at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. GMT, and the next day at 7 a.m. Australian time and 9 a.m. New Zealand time. We are going to be covering the Mercury Retrograde Revival Guide so that you don't just have to survive, but you can also thrive. In this workshop, we're going to be getting really curious about what Mercury Retrograde in Cancer wants you to know, why you don't need to freak the F out, what to do in your business, what not to do in your business, and to, create a 6-week action plan for each point of this retrograde cycle. Then we will be looking at how Mercury retrograde will impact you based on your own natal chart. And as time permits, I will be giving mini readings to as many people during the workshop. Of course, every workshop will come with the slides and worksheets, and there will be a replay for you to access if you have to leave early or if you can't make it live. Head over to thesavvyluminary.com/Mercury to register. Again, it's a pay what you can, and 10% of the proceeds will be donated to Girls Embracing Mothers, a nonprofit that empowers girls with mothers in prison to break the cycle of incarceration and lead successful lives with vision and purpose. Okay, so let's look at what Mercury retrograde wants you to reconsider house by house. Again, Mercury is going to be transiting between let's go backwards, between 14 degrees of Cancer and 5 degrees of Cancer. It's going to be going back and forth over these few degrees. And so we get to look at our own charts and see what we need to restore, replenish, and realign our sense of, okay? So I want you to take a look at your natal chart, and I want you to look at where 5 degrees of Cancer to 14 degrees of Cancer is in your chart, because the house that those degrees occupy is where Mercury will be retrograding, and it's going to give you some insight as to what you need to reconsider. So if we can think of the theme of restore, replenish, and realign your sense of, fill in the blank, depending on the house. So if Mercury retrograde will be transiting your first house, you need to restore, replenish, and realign your sense of self and brand identity. If Mercury retrograde will be transiting your second house, you need to restore, replenish, and realign your sense of values and finances. If Mercury retrograde will be transiting your third house, you need to restore, replenish, and realign your sense of connection and messaging. If Mercury retrograde will be transiting your fourth house, you need to restore, replenish, and realign your sense of emotional security and community. If Mercury retrograde will be transiting your fifth house, you need to restore, replenish, and realign your sense of creativity and passion. If Mercury retrograde will be transiting your sixth house, you need to restore, replenish, and realign your sense of order, wellness, and routine. If Mercury retrograde will be transiting your seventh house, you need to restore, replenish, and realign your sense of relationships and collaborations. If Mercury retrograde will be transiting your eighth house, you need to restore, replenish, and realign your sense of self-trust and true transformation. If Mercury retrograde will be transiting your ninth house, you need to restore, replenish, and realign your sense of beliefs and promoting yourself. If Mercury retrograde will be transiting your 10th house, you need to restore, replenish, and realign your sense of accomplishment and ultimate mission. If Mercury retrograde will be transiting your 11th house, you need to restore, replenish, and realign your sense of humanity and your social impact. If Mercury retrograde will be transiting your 12th house, you need to restore, replenish, and realign your sense of releasing and reconnecting to your highest self. I hope that those house by house considerations help give you insight as to the themes that are being asked to be re-examined during this Mercury retrograde in Cancer. So what will you do? I would love to hear, right? Teaching astrology as an empowering tool for entrepreneurs to reach their highest potential so they can change their world is a mission of mine. And I would love to hear how you plan to integrate these tips and tricks into your real life and business. Email me, DM me on Facebook or Instagram. I would love to hear how you integrate this knowing into your life. As for the astrology highlights for the week of June 14th through June 20th, things are relatively calm until we get to, well, of course, the Mercury retrograde that happens on the 18th. But then, summer solstice, we have summer solstice on the 20th, and then we also have new moon in Cancer on Saturday, June 20th. So I am going to drop next week's episode a little bit early. I normally drop it on my Sunday, but I will be dropping it a little bit earlier so that I can cover the new moon in Cancer, the summer solstice, as well as Cancer season in our very next episode. It's a lot of information to cover, so I don't want to make this episode too long. We've talked enough. So again, on Monday, I have a special workshop, Mercury Retrograde Revival Guide. Please consider joining us. Head over to thesavvyluminary.com/Mercury to sign up. It's pay what you can. And also, I invite you to my free Facebook group, The Savvy Luminary. It's a safe online space where entrepreneurs get to connect and share their business challenges and wins and share their astrological insights. Head over to Facebook and look for the group, The Savvy Luminary. All right, that's all I have for this week. So have a wonderful Mercury retrograde. Well, we'll be in it for a few weeks, but have a great start. And I hope that you know that you are empowered to use and harness this energy. Mahalo for listening to this brand new podcast. If you enjoyed learning about astrology for entrepreneurs, help me spread the word by sharing this podcast with your business besties, and hop over to The Savvy Luminary for links to episode notes and our free Facebook community where you can send me questions about astrology or branding, as well as connect with other like-minded businesses.